A young nurse saved the life of a man when he got ran over by a horse at the park. When he woke up, he changed her life forever. It had been a long week of double shifts and sleepless nights. The hospital halls were always filled with urgency, and Kathleen bore the weight of many lives in her hands. That afternoon, she had promised herself a sliver of peace, an hour away from fluorescent lights and the echo of beeping monitors. The city park, wrapped in the warm light of the setting sun, offered her the kind of stillness she rarely got to enjoy. She sat on her usual bench beneath a jacaranda tree, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. Around her, life played out like a moving painting. Children squealed as they chased each other near the fountains, couples strolled hand in hand, and joggers passed by, nodding politely. Dogs barked in the distance, and birds chirped above, their melodies dancing with the breeze. For the first time in days, Kathleen allowed herself to exhale fully. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the sun touch her face, warming her skin. And then it happened. A scream. High-pitched. Panicked. Kathleen's eyes flew open just in time to see the chaos unravel. A large brown horse, riderless and terrified, galloped wildly across the grass, its hooves pounding like war drums. People scattered in all directions. Strollers were abandoned, dogs yanked back by their leashes. The animal's eyes were wild, foam lathering around its mouth as it tore through the park in a blind dash. Kathleen stood immediately, her coffee spilling at her feet, staining the grass. In the horse's path, just beyond a food cart, stood a man, tall, seemingly lost in thought, headphones on, oblivious to the chaos. He turned his head slightly, too late. The impact was devastating. The horse clipped him with brutal force, sending him airborne before he slammed into the ground with a sickening crack. Gasps echoed around the park. Everything else faded away. Kathleen was already moving, her legs pumping as adrenaline took over. She dropped her bag mid-run, dodging fleeing pedestrians, her eyes locked on the man crumpled in the grass. She knelt beside him and instantly assessed the damage. His chest wasn't rising. No pulse. "Someone call 911, she shouted, loud and firm, snapping the frozen bystanders out of their stupor. A woman with shaking hands fumbled for her phone. Kathleen tilted the man's head back, clearing his airway, and began chest compressions. Her palms pressed hard and steady against his sternum, counting in her mind, blocking out everything else. 1, 2, 3. His body jerked with each compression, but there was still no response. His face, pale and bloodied, told a story of a man who had been alive just minutes ago, maybe walking to meet a friend or heading home from work. "Come on, don't do this." Kathleen's mind didn't wander often during emergencies, but something about him felt different. Maybe it was his age. Young, early 30s at most. Maybe it was the way the light touched his face, soft and fleeting, as if nature itself were holding its breath. She continued CPR relentlessly, sweat trickling down her temples, breath sharp. After what felt like hours but had only been minutes, his chest gave a subtle rise. A weak breath. "Yes," she whispered. She repositioned him gently, cradling his head as a faint moan escaped his lips. The paramedics finally arrived, charging through the crowd with their gear. Kathleen didn't look up as they approached. Her hands were still steady on the man's wrist, checking his pulse, eyes scanning his injuries, fractured ribs, possible internal bleeding, and a concussion at the very least. One of the EMTs recognized her. "Kathleen? You again." She managed a breathless nod. "He's alive," she said, standing and moving aside, her legs trembling. The EMTs took over quickly, securing an oxygen mask on the man and loading him onto a stretcher. Kathleen watched, her heart still racing, as they wheeled him away. Her hands were stained with grass, dirt, and a touch of blood, and she realized then that the park had fallen completely silent. Dozens of strangers stood around, eyes wide with awe. One small boy tugged at his mother's hand and asked, "Is she a superhero?" Kathleen offered a faint smile, but she didn't feel like a hero. She felt shaken, raw. A woman approached her, offering a bottle of water. "That was incredible," she said softly. "You saved him." Kathleen took the bottle with a nod of thanks but didn't reply. Her mind was already 1,000 miles away, replaying the moment of impact, the lifeless face, the shallow gasp, the way his chest finally moved. She never learned his name. White walls. Monitors beeping. The faint smell of antiseptic lingers in the sterile calm of the hospital room. Somewhere nearby, a machine clicks and hums. The air is cold, humming with quiet efficiency. Curtains rustle gently where sunlight slips through the slats. The world is hushed and unnatural, like the pause between heartbeats. Thomas's eyes flutter open. At first, he sees only light, too bright, too white. The ceiling is a blank canvas, unfamiliar and endless. His mouth is dry. His chest aches. Breathing feels like lifting weights. When he tries to move, pain shoots across his ribs, sharp and immediate. A soft voice breaks the stillness. "You're awake." He turns his head slowly, vision swimming. A nurse stands beside his bed, clipboard in hand, her smile warm but cautious. "Welcome back," she says, checking the monitors. "You've been out for a while." His voice is gravel and sand. Where am I?" "St. Christopher's Medical," she replies. "You came in 2 nights ago." "Emergency trauma." "Accident?" he asks. "Yes. You were trampled in the park. A horse got loose and ran you over." The words sink in slowly. Trampled. Park. Horse. There's a strange, distorted echo in his mind. Laughter, footsteps on grass, the roar of who's like thunder, a scream, then blackness. "What happened?" he asks again, more urgently this time. "You were lucky," the nurse says, her voice softening. "Someone saved you." A flicker in his eyes. He grips the edge of the blanket. "Who?" The nurse pauses, her brow furrowing. "We don't know. Witnesses said she was a nurse, off duty. She gave you CPR before paramedics arrived. Stabilized you. Then she disappeared." He stares at her. "You don't know her name?" "No. She didn't wait around. Just vanished." Thomas turns his head, eyes fixed once more on the ceiling. His mind floods with fragments. Not just the impact, but the moment after. The darkness. The weightlessness. The feeling of falling. And through it all, her. A face. Blurred by sun and panic. Eyes like dusk. Hands pressed firmly to his chest. The feeling of being called back. Tethered to life by sheer will. She was real. He swallows hard, chest rising with effort. "I need to find her." The nurse glances at him, surprised. "You're still recovering, Mr. Langston." "Maybe," he cuts her off, barely above a whisper. "Find her." The nurse nods gently, not arguing. But something in his tone makes her pause before leaving. Something final. Something like a vow. The days that follow are slow and strange. Thomas is used to control, to knowing where he stands, to making the rules. But now he is a man in a gown, tethered to wires, confined to a room where time crawls. The pain is manageable, but the restlessness gnaws at him. Visitors come and go. Flowers line the windowsill. Cards pile up on the bedside table. But through it all, his mind never leaves her. He remembers flashes. Her voice, calm but urgent. Her hands, sure and steady. The way she looked at him, not with fear, but with absolute purpose. Like she refused to let him die. And then she was gone. He watches the news segments. Local stations mention a Good Samaritan nurse who saved a man's life in the park. No name. No photo. Just the ghost of a miracle. She didn't want credit, one reporter says. She just did what she had to do. Thomas stares at the screen. Something about that makes his chest ache more than the broken ribs. Why didn't she stay? One morning, Brian, his longtime friend and assistant, walks in holding a tablet and a coffee. "You're a damn legend," Brian says, showing him a news article. Mysterious nurse saves tech CEO from tragic death. People think it was staged. Thomas barely glances at it. "Have you found her?" Brian's grin fades. "Still working on it. No one caught her on video. A few witnesses described her mid-30s, brunette, scrubs or something like it. But that's it." Thomas leans back against his pillow. "I remember her." "You think you remember her," Brian says carefully. "You had head trauma." "Could be." "No," Thomas says firmly. "I know what I saw." Brian nods. "All right, I'll keep digging." But Thomas doesn't wait. He hires a private investigator. He interviews witnesses. He contacts the EMTs who first arrived on the scene. They confirm it. She was a nurse. Or something close. She was gone before they could ask questions. No name. No badge. Just a woman with calm hands and the kind of presence you don't forget. Every night, he dreams of her. In the dreams, she walks away from him through the park, disappearing into the light. He calls out, but she never turns back. 1 week later, Thomas is released. The sunlight feels foreign on his skin. The city buzzes around him, alive and loud. But something inside him has shifted. The near-death has burned away his distractions. He doesn't return to his office. He ignores his schedule. He cancels meetings and retreats from the noise. Instead, he returns to the park. He stands on the very spot where he fell, beneath a canopy of trees, where laughter still rings and joggers pass by as if nothing ever happened. There's a faint patch of dried blood in the grass, nearly gone now. Time moves fast. He closes his eyes. He can feel her there. He can see her there. He imagines her sitting on a bench, sipping coffee, unaware of the role she's about to play. He imagines her startled by the scream, her body leaping into motion, her instincts carrying her to him. He wonders what she was thinking. If she feared he wouldn't make it. If she walked away because she didn't want to watch him die. Or maybe she walked away because that's what she always does, save someone, then vanish. Thomas opens his eyes and whispers to the air, "Who are you?" Across town, Kathleen stands by a hospital bed, wrapping a bandage around a young woman's wrist. Her face is calm, her hands methodical, her voice low and soothing. She's done this 1,000 times. But she hasn't stopped thinking about him. She didn't stay to be thanked. That's not why she did it. That's never why she does it. She just knew he needed help, and she gave it. That's the job. That's the calling. And yet, she remembers his face, the stillness of it, the quiet that followed the chaos. She remembers willing him to breathe, the joy that cracked through her when he finally did. She left because it felt too personal, too close. But now, she wonders if he remembers her. 2 weeks after the accident, Thomas returns to the park with a sign. He pins it to the tree nearest the scene. "To the woman who saved my life, I don't know your name, but I remember your face. If you see this, thank you. You changed everything. Please let me return the kindness. Please let me find you." He includes a phone number. He waits. Days pass. Then a week. Nothing. Until one evening, as the sun dips low, a stranger approaches. She's wearing scrubs. Her hair is tied back. She holds a paper cup of coffee. He turns, and for a moment, time folds. It's her. He knows it instantly. "I saw your sign," she says quietly. He takes a step toward her, breath catching in his chest. "It was you." She nods once. "I wasn't going to come, but I had to know you were okay." "I am," he says. "Because of you." They stand there, in the golden light, two souls tethered by a moment neither of them asked for, but neither of them can forget. "What's your name?" he asks. "Kathleen." He smiles. "Thomas." They shake hands, but it feels like more. Like something beginning. That night, they sit on the park bench where she once sipped her coffee and watched the world. He tells her about the moments he remembered, about how her face was the last thing he saw before the darkness. She listens, quiet, eyes searching his. "I don't usually stay," she admits. "It's easier that way." "But you came back," he says. She looks away. "I couldn't stop thinking about you." "Neither could I," he whispers. They sit in silence, letting the weight of those words settle between them. The sun fades. Lights come on. Somewhere nearby, a child laughs. Kathleen turns to him. "So what now?" Thomas leans back, eyes still on the sky. "Now," he says, "we see what life looks like after it was almost taken away." She glances at him, surprised. He turns to her. "And maybe we build something. Together." Kathleen studies him for a moment, then smiles. "Maybe." The moment lingers. And just like that, what began with a collision becomes a connection, not born from fate, but forged in the quiet aftermath of survival. The rain whispered against the city as dusk settled in. A fine mist cloaked the streets, softening the glow of the street lamps and turning the sidewalks slick and golden. Thomas stood outside a modest brick apartment building, a small bouquet in one hand, a nervous rhythm in his chest. His expensive coat was already damp, rain clinging to his shoulders, but he didn't care. Not tonight. He raised his hand and knocked on the door. Inside, footsteps. Then the click of a lock. The door creaked open. Kathleen stood there in a faded sweatshirt, her hair damp and tousled, a mug of tea in her other hand. She looked at him with wide, cautious eyes, like she'd opened the door to a memory rather than a man. "Hi," he said, trying not to sound as breathless as he felt. "Hi, I'm Thomas. You saved me." For a moment, she said nothing. Then her shoulders relaxed, just a little. She recognized him, not just from that day in the park, but from the endless trail of media coverage that followed. She hadn't expected him to find her. "Not really. You're soaked," she said, stepping aside. He smiled sheepishly and stepped into the small apartment. It was warm and filled with soft light. Books were stacked on the shelves, A candle flickered on the windowsill, and the faint scent of lavender floated through the air. It felt like peace. I didn't know if you'd answer, he admitted, still standing near the door. But I had to see you. I had to say thank you. Kathleen crossed her arms, unsure of what to do with the sudden vulnerability in his voice. I told you, I wasn't looking for recognition. I know, he said quickly, and I'm not here to make a scene. I needed to tell you what that moment meant to me. Not just because you saved my life, but because he stopped himself, suddenly self-conscious. He was a billionaire, used to boardrooms and polished speeches. But here, in this warm little apartment with rain on the windows, none of those words mattered. She sighed and gestured toward the couch. You want some tea? I'd love some. Minutes later, they sat in the living room, steam rising between them from mismatched mugs. The rain tapped softly against the window, a gentle soundtrack to the silence that followed. I didn't expect you to find me, she said eventually, studying him. I try not to make what I do personal. Thomas looked at her. I sincere. But this was personal. You didn't just save a life, you changed one. She tilted her head slightly. What do you mean? He took a slow breath, fingers warming around the mug. Before the accident, my life was calculated. I ran a company, built empires, measured everything by profit, efficiency, growth. Kathleen smiled faintly. And now, he said, looking directly at her, I measure by something else. That moment, you kneeling in the grass, refusing to let me go, it rewired something in me. I was so close to being nothing, and you pulled me back. Her expression softened, something unspoken flickering in her eyes. I was just doing what anyone would have done. No, he said. That's not true. Most people froze. I've seen the footage. You didn't. You acted. You fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. Silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, just full. Kathleen looked down at her tea. It's hard to explain. Being a nurse, I see the worst parts of people's lives. The pain, the fear. Sometimes you walk away and wonder if you even made a difference. That day, I didn't think I'd ever see you again. I just hoped you lived. I did, Thomas said, voice low. Because of you. And not just lived. I woke up different. I've been thinking about things I've ignored for years. Purpose. People. Second chances. She studied him for a long moment, surprised by the raw honesty in his words. She had expected some overly polite thanks, maybe a gift basket. Not this. Not a man stripped of ego, standing before her with sincerity and a heart cracked open. Why me? She asked softly. He blinked. What do you mean? I'm just a nurse. There are 100 others like me. Thomas shook his head. You're not just a nurse. You're the nurse. The one who ran toward danger. The one who wouldn't let a stranger die alone. A pause. And I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Her cheeks colored faintly. She looked away, into her tea, into the rain, into anything but his eyes. It had been so long since someone had looked at her like that. Not as a uniform, not as a helper, but as a person. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Just say you'll let me take you to dinner, he said gently. Not because you saved me, but because I want to know you. The real you. She met his eyes then, and for the first time, allowed herself to smile, really smile. Not the tight, polite kind, but something genuine. Something that surprised even her. I'll think about it, she said. I'll take that. Outside, the rain continued to fall, steady and soft. Inside, something new had begun to bloom between them. It wasn't dramatic or fast. It didn't need to be. It was quiet, tentative, like the first flicker of warmth after a long winter. A spark, not born from fireworks, but from truth, from gratitude, from being seen. And as the evening deepened and the city slowed around them, Kathleen and Thomas sat together, two people from different worlds, bound by a single moment that had changed everything. And neither of them wanted to look away. The clinic buzzed with motion. It wasn't sleek or high-tech, far from it. The walls bore faded paint, and the overhead lights flickered slightly. But the place pulsed with life, with purpose. Children laughed softly in the corners. Elderly patients clutched worn prescription slips. Nurses moved swiftly, voices calm and kind. Amid them all moved Kathleen, steady and focused, a gentle hand in the chaos. Thomas stood at the entrance, unnoticed at first, watching. He wasn't used to scenes like this. His world had always been orderly, sterilized, and built to impress. But this small, overburdened haven tucked between forgotten neighborhoods, felt more human than any corporate tower he'd ever owned. Kathleen knelt beside a small boy with a gash on his forearm. He sniffled but didn't cry. She spoke to him softly, hands steady as she cleaned and bandaged the wound. When she finished, she offered him a sticker and a wink. He beamed and ran off, proudly showing his patched-up arm to his waiting mother. Thomas finally stepped forward. "You're a long way from Wall Street," Kathleen said, glancing at him as she washed her hands at a nearby sink. "I could say the same to you," he replied with a small smile. "You could be chief of surgery somewhere. Why here?" She dried her hands and turned to face him fully. "Because these people don't have anywhere else to go. They can't afford hospitals or insurance plans. This place matters." Thomas looked around again. A volunteer wheeled an elderly man into an exam room. A young mother rocked her baby while waiting patiently. Everything here operated on borrowed time and overworked hearts. "You do all this every day?" he asked. Kathleen nodded, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Most days. Sometimes I'm here late. Sometimes I run supply drives. Sometimes I cover night shifts when the others can't." There was no complaint in her voice, just fact. Just quiet resilience. He stepped closer. "You never told me." She shrugged lightly. "You never asked." That answer hit him harder than he expected. That evening, Kathleen stayed late again. Thomas watched from the clinic's doorway before slipping away into the city night, deep in thought. Back in his penthouse, he didn't sleep. The view from the windows sparkled with city lights, but it all felt hollow. The spreadsheets on his tablet, the pending deals, the boardroom slides waiting for his approval, all of it faded into static. Instead, he sat at his desk, pen in hand, and began to sketch. Not numbers, not mergers, but walls, exam rooms, a reception area with natural light, storage for medicine, a break room with real chairs, a garden out back, a place where children could heal and play, a space where people like Kathleen could work without limits. Hours passed. Coffee cooled. He called in his architect before dawn. By the next afternoon, he returned to Kathleen, not with flowers, not with flattery, but with blueprints. He stood at her door again, heart pounding just a little harder this time. When she answered, still in scrubs, exhaustion painting shadows beneath her eyes, he held the rolled-up plans like a gift. "I saw the clinic," he began, "and I saw what it could be, what it should be." Kathleen blinked, confused. "Thomas, what is this?" He unrolled the blueprints on her kitchen table. The paper stretched across it, filled with clean lines and careful detail. Every room labeled, every square foot accounted for. Her breath caught in her throat. "I had my team work overnight," he said. "This is just the beginning. A facility 10 times bigger than what you have now. Solar-powered. Fully equipped. We'll hire the best, but it'll be free to those who need it most." Kathleen stared at the plans, unable to speak. "I don't want to run it," Thomas added quickly. "I don't want credit. I want to build it. For you. For them. For the people you show up for every day." She still didn't answer. Instead, her hand reached out slowly, almost trembling, tracing one of the rooms on the paper. "I know it's fast," he said, softer now. "And maybe it's crazy, but I've been chasing wealth my whole life. This is the first time I've ever felt like I could build something that really matters." He met her eyes. "Let's build it together, Kathleen. Let's make your dream real." Tears welled in her eyes. She tried to blink them back, but they came anyway, uninvited, unspoken. For years, she had patched holes in broken systems. She had made do. She had stretched bandages and rations and energy across too many needs. She had given and hoped quietly that someday someone might notice. She just hadn't expected it to be him. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," he replied. The words hung in the space between them. And while Kathleen didn't answer right away, her fingers gripped the edge of the blueprints like a lifeline. Her breath shook with the weight of hope, real, tangible, terrifying hope. This wasn't just an offer. It was belief. Belief that what she did mattered. Belief that she deserved more than survival. Belief that maybe, just maybe, the world could be better, brick by brick, heartbeat by heartbeat. Kathleen nodded slowly, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Thomas stepped closer and gently touched her hand. "No more patching holes," he said. "We build." And just like that, a dream long buried beneath duty and fatigue began to rise again, bold and real and waiting to be made true. Together, the morning sun rose like a slow blessing over the city, casting a golden haze across rooftops and forgotten alleyways. For once, the district that had long been dismissed as the poor part of town shimmered with promise. The scent of fresh paint mingled with the crispness of new beginnings. People gathered along the sidewalk, their eyes drawn to the sleek, glass-paneled building that now stood proudly where a crumbling lot once existed. Kathleen adjusted her white coat as she stood at the entrance of the new clinic, the Kathleen Heart-Free Medical Center. She hadn't wanted her name on it, not at first, but Thomas had insisted. Not for ego, not for headlines, but because he believed people should know the name of the woman who gave hope a heartbeat. A crowd had gathered. Children perched on their parents' shoulders. Elderly residents leaned on walkers and canes, their faces glowing with quiet gratitude. Reporters jostled for position, cameras ready, microphones extended. But for a moment, Kathleen didn't hear any of it. She stared at the building. Its wide windows, the soft blue banners fluttering above the entrance, the green rooftop garden she had once doodled on a napkin. It was real. Every exam room, every gleaming corridor, every stock cabinet was a piece of a dream she'd only dared whisper a year ago. And beside her stood Thomas. Gone was the sharp suit and the guarded businessman's gaze. Today, he wore a simple jacket, sleeves rolled, a slight tremble in his fingers as he clutched the ceremonial ribbon-cutting scissors. He looked not like a mogul, but like a man who had come home to something he never knew he was missing. "You okay?" he whispered to her. Kathleen nodded, blinking quickly. I never thought I'd see this." He smiled gently. "You built this. I just helped pour the foundation." A hush fell as the mayor stepped forward, delivering a polished speech about community revitalization, about public-private partnerships. Kathleen heard the words but felt distant from them, floating just above the moment, tethered only by the pounding of her heart. Then came her turn. She stepped to the podium, cameras flashing like fireworks. She didn't look at the reporters. She looked at the people. "I'm not great at speeches," she began, the microphone crackling faintly. "But I know how to speak from the heart." A murmur of encouragement rippled through the crowd. "This building behind me isn't about concrete or steel. It's about humanity. It's about the people in this neighborhood who've been forgotten for too long. The mother who works 3 jobs and still can't afford a doctor. The grandfather rationing his insulin. The child who wakes up with asthma and nowhere to go." She paused, letting the silence honor those stories. "This center is for them. It's for you. And it's only possible because someone believed that we could do more than patch the wounds. We could prevent them, heal them, dignify them." Her eyes flicked to Thomas for a moment, and he felt the weight of it, the honor, the trust, the transformation. "So today," Kathleen finished, "we cut a ribbon, but more than that, we open a door. To care, to hope, to something better." Applause burst from the crowd, loud and long and full of joy. Thomas stepped up beside her. They took the scissors together, one hand each, and with a swift, clean motion, sliced through the ribbon. The cheers rang out like music. The doors swung open. Inside, the building buzzed to life. Children wandered through the pediatric wing, clutching balloons. Nurses gave tours. Doctors greeted new patients with warm handshakes and kind eyes. There were real chairs in the waiting room, fresh flowers on the reception desk. Artwork from local schools hung proudly in the halls. And as Kathleen walked through it all, she felt something deep and steady rise inside her. Not pride, not relief, belonging. Thomas followed a few steps behind her, watching. Always watching. A reporter cornered him, mic extended. "Mr. Blake, you've donated millions to causes over the years. What makes this one different?" He looked around the room, the laughter, the life, the way Kathleen was hugged by a little girl with bandaged knees, and smiled. "Because this one changed me," he said quietly. "I came here to rebuild a clinic, but somewhere along the way, I rebuilt myself." The reporter blinked, caught off guard. "And what do you mean by that?" "I used to measure success by how much I earned," he said. "Now, I measure it by how much I can give. Not just money, but purpose, meaning." He looked back at Kathleen, who was kneeling beside an elderly woman, her voice soft and reassuring. "I spent years building things that disappeared in a quarterly report," he continued. "But this will last, because it lives in people." The reporter lowered the mic slowly, no more questions forming. Later, when the crowd had thinned and twilight softened the edges of the day, Thomas and Kathleen stood on the rooftop garden, looking out over the city. Below, the clinic glowed gently in the fading light. Kathleen leaned against the railing, her eyes scanning the streets she had walked for years. I used to imagine this place, she said softly. But I never thought I'd have help bringing it to life. You didn't need help, he said. You just needed someone to believe. She turned to him, a smile teasing at her lips. And what about you? He chuckled. I needed someone to show me what living really looks like. They stood in silence for a moment. No flashing lights. No speeches. Just the hum of the city below, and the knowledge that something extraordinary had taken root. Not just in bricks and mortar, but in them. Together, they had built something more than a clinic. They had built a beginning. The park had never looked more alive. Spring had settled in like a gentle lullaby, coaxing cherry blossoms to full bloom. Their pale pink petals danced on the breeze, drifting like soft confetti across the winding paths and over the laughter of children chasing each other in sun-dappled joy. Joggers passed with lazy strides, couples strolled hand in hand, and the air was filled with birdsong and warmth. It was the same park, but everything had changed. Kathleen and Thomas walked side by side, their pace unhurried, matching the rhythm of the moment. No rush, no destination, just the steady silence of two souls who had seen each other at their most broken and their most brave. Thomas carried 2 coffees, just as she had once. Kathleen tucked her hands into the pockets of her light sweater, her eyes tracing the path ahead. They moved past the tree where the horse had first appeared, wild-eyed and galloping, a storm tearing through a peaceful afternoon. Past the flower bed where strangers had once stood, frozen in fear, watching a woman in scrubs fight to save a life. Past the stretch of grass where a man had nearly died, and instead had been reborn. And then they reached the bench. The same wooden bench where Kathleen had once sat, sipping her coffee and watching the world. Where peace had shattered in an instant. Where fate had taken her by the hand and spun her into the heart of someone else's story. Now, that someone walked beside her. Thomas gestured to the bench. May I? Kathleen smiled. Only if you're buying the coffee. He handed her the cup with a grin. Always. They sat together, the bench creaking slightly under the weight of memory. The cherry trees above swayed with a sigh, scattering more petals at their feet. For a moment, they said nothing. There was no need. The quiet wrapped around them like a shared blanket. An old man with a cane passed by and tipped his hat to them. Kathleen nodded in return. Thomas smiled. The world had taken notice of them now, not as strangers linked by chance, but as something more, something lasting. I still remember the sound, Thomas said after a while, his voice low. The hooves, the scream, and then, nothing. Just your face, floating above me, like an angel. Kathleen chuckled softly, shaking her head. You were delirious. I'm no angel. He looked at her, eyes soft. You were to me. She stared ahead, the playground in view now, children swinging high, their laughter painting the air. You know, she said, when I ran over to you that day, I didn't think. I just moved. I didn't know your name. I didn't know if I could save you. I just couldn't let you go. I know, Thomas replied. You gave me breath when I had none. You gave me a second chance. She turned to face him. And you gave me one. He tilted his head, confused. Me. Kathleen nodded slowly. I was surviving. Day by day. Patient to patient. I loved what I did, but it felt like pouring from an empty cup. The clinic barely kept its doors open. I barely remembered what it meant to dream. Thomas was quiet, listening. You reminded me, she continued, that dreams are worth having. That it's okay to want more. That building something bigger isn't selfish, it's service. A soft breeze picked up, brushing petals across their shoulders. You saved me too, Thomas, she whispered. His hand reached for hers, fingers brushing gently until their palms met, warm and certain. They sat like that for a while, watching the park go on around them. Children grew tired and were lifted by their parents. Dogs barked playfully in the distance. A teenager strummed a guitar near the fountain, the melody drifting like smoke. Thomas glanced at Kathleen, her face calm, her eyes still bright despite everything. If I hadn't gone to the park that day, if I hadn't taken my break on that bench, they both smiled, finishing the thought together. Fate's wild hand, Kathleen murmured. He laughed. It really does like drama. She nudged him playfully. You wouldn't have it any other way. He looked down at their hands, still intertwined. I used to think I had everything. Penthouse, power, all the zeros in my bank account. But none of it meant anything. Not really. And now, she asked. Now I know what matters, he said. This. You. The lives we touch. The ones we lift. The ones we love. She didn't reply right away. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with peace. That quiet, powerful kind of peace that only comes after a storm has passed and the sun breaks through the clouds just right. "You're not the man who collapsed under a horse," she said gently. "And I'm not just the nurse who ran to save him. We're something more now." He nodded. "We're survivors. We're builders. We're us," he said, smiling. A little girl walked past them, clutching a paper flower in her hand. She stopped, stared at the blossoms falling from the trees, and twirled in delight. Kathleen and Thomas watched her, hearts full. The girl's mother called her, and she skipped away, leaving behind a single cherry blossom that drifted down and landed softly on Kathleen's knee. She plucked it gently, turned it in her fingers, and handed it to Thomas. "For memory," she said. He tucked it into his coat pocket. "For always." As the sun dipped lower, casting long golden shadows across the park, Kathleen leaned her head on his shoulder. He rested his cheek against her hair. No sirens. No chaos. No noise. Just two lives, changed forever, quietly coming full circle under the falling blossoms. If you enjoyed this story about Kathleen and Thomas, about how a single moment in the park led to a life forever changed, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful, cinematic narratives just like this one. We'd love to hear from you. What did you think about how the story ended? That final scene in the park, the cherry blossoms falling. Kathleen's quiet words, "You saved me too." How did that make you feel? Tell us in the comments. What would you rate this story out of 10? Be honest. We're always trying to grow and get better at storytelling that moves the heart. And while you're down there, let us know where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel across the world. Thanks again for spending your time with Kathleen and Thomas. We'll see you in the next story.